And of course, put them into the vehicles where you have the best margins and the tightest supply. So it's going to be chaotic and challenging, but I think we can navigate through it. Still being able to hit our retail targets for this year.
Joining me now for a closer look at how the silicon shortage is affecting the globe. We're joined by Bloomberg anchor Caroline Hyde. From London and our Bloomberg News editor, Peter Elstrom in Tokyo. Caroline, I want to start with you and a look at Europe. We just heard from a number of car makers there. How is the shortage impacting them across the region? Who's getting hurt the most?
Well, the automakers specifically, a number of them coming out. Some of the truck makers, Volvo, for example, already saying they've got substantial impact in terms of the supply chain being hit. We've also had the likes of Volkswagen. You're hearing from the US head there, but they've had to idle manufacturing in Portugal. You're hearing from Stellantis, which is how PSA and Fiat came together. They've had plenty of knock-on effects in terms of their US production capacity. So certainly the automakers. You also have from Continental in that sort of string of people speaking there. They're an auto supplier, part supplier. They're lobbying the likes of the government, asking Taiwan government too, not just its own German government, to really lend a hand here, stop putting automakers at the back of the queue. But there are winners, and we've got some chip makers here in Europe, and they're doing pretty well. ST Micro, the likes of NXP doing well as well, Infineon, and notably the chip equipment makers, Emily. ASML, one of its biggest customer is TSMC. So when TSMC says it's going to spend $100 billion more on beefing up its own capacity, well, they're going to win out by it.
TSMC, of course, the dominant foundry and based in Taiwan. We're going to talk to Peter about that shortly. But Caroline, let's talk a little bit about the EU's plan. They have a plan. What's the plan and will it work?
There's a plan. There's perhaps not much detail on how they enact that plan, but yeah, they've got this so-called digital compass that they've come up with, and big and bold, Emily, as always politics tends to be here. 2030, they want to be really doubling down on the most efficient chips. By 2030, in fact, they say they want to be making about 20%, so 1/5 of all the value that's coming out of the chip sector. They have, as I say, got some chip makers here, the likes of STMicro and XP, but really, there's questions coming from the local executives as to whether the demand is there for the very high-end, high-level chips. Because remember, I mean, we make a lot of autos in Europe, but I'm not seeing many phone makers. I'm not seeing many consumer electronics makers. So is the demand really there, particularly as you're going to have a lot of subsidies fed into this to make this a real financial commitment? So question marks from the sector itself, also question marks coming from TSMC itself too.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that next. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London. Thanks so much for the view from Europe. Let's get to Asia now. We're joined by Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom, our executive editor for tech coverage in Asia. So, Peter, TSMC has said during this crisis it's going to spend more than $100 billion over the next 3 years to expand its chip-making abilities. Is it a problem that TSMC dominates the foundry business so much? Does that somehow exacerbate the shortage that others are fearing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's certainly a bottleneck. They've invested so much money over the years to take this place as sort of the premier foundry where they do these customized chips for companies like Apple and NVIDIA and many others. And right now they're spending a ton of money to be able to catch up with the surging demand. It's not a challenge for them, of course. They have tons of business to invest in, tons at this point. But it is a challenge if you're sitting in Europe, as Caroline was talking about, or you're sitting in the United States and you're concerned about whether your companies are going to be able to get enough chips. And these efforts that you see in the US and in Europe to build more domestic capacity, it's going to take too long to be able to address this particular shortage in the chip industry. But long term, they're thinking long term in these places, and they're using this as an opportunity to get some money for investments that they've wanted to make for a very long time.
Now, it's not just the EU, but the US and China that are all trying to build more domestic capacity. How does geopolitics factor into this situation?
Well, it's a very big question. We're seeing that right now, not just because of the chip shortage, but because of the tensions between the United States and China. The U.S. has cut off a few key companies in China. Huawei is probably the most notable, where they've said we're not going to send you the cutting edge chips that you need to build smartphones, for example. That has motivated the Chinese government to double down on this effort that they've been trying to execute for years to build their own domestic chip industry. They're far, far behind. They don't have the capabilities of TSMC. They don't have the capabilities of a Samsung or an Intel at this point. But they feel like this is a key sign that they need to build their own domestic chip industry. They'll do it slowly. They'll do it methodically. You saw in the latest 5-year plan that they're going to dedicate billions of dollars to doing this. And they're more determined than ever because they've seen how vulnerable they are when it comes to something like the U.S. cutting off Huawei and a few other big companies there.
All right, Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom in Tokyo. Thanks so much for the view from your side of the world. All right, coming up, tech giants Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are getting into the chip design and manufacturing business. We're going to talk to Amazon Vice President Dave Brown about the company's own efforts to make chips as its massive cloud business expands. It's also happening at Apple, Google, Microsoft, and more. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Do you have any interest if President Biden invited you just to come and take a tour of the White House just to see what it looks like?
If he wants to talk about how to empower people, boy, I would be there in a nanosecond.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Madame Lagarde, has the balance of risk actually shifted since the last policy meeting?
Well, our balance of risk is still tilted to the downside in the short term, but it is much more balanced in the medium term.